Most newly awakened lords pray for a starting territory the size of a backyard. But I just claimed an unprecedented SSSSSSSS rank planet 20 times the size of Earth. To lift my destitute family out of poverty, I must survive a brutal 7-day trial in this wild world. But my only starting assets are a pack of the most pathetic, cowardly slimes in existence. June 10th, 2426. This was the day that would ultimately dictate the entire trajectory of my existence. Outside the gates of the Awakening Center, the crowd was packed so tightly that breathing felt like a luxury. For those of our age, 18 was the threshold of destiny, the sole opportunity to awaken as a lord. And in this world, to be a lord was to possess everything: unmeasurable wealth, absolute power, and unchallenged status. Mom, Dad, Xiaohuan, you should stop here. I gripped my identification card, took a slow, deep breath, and stepped toward the security gates. You can do this, big brother. Son, remember? It is perfectly fine even if things do not work out. I glanced back over my shoulder. I saw the deep lines of exhaustion on my parents' aging faces, and my little sister's silly, encouraging grin. I forced a smile, waved a brief goodbye, and turned my back on them to walk inside. It is fine even if things do not work out. Like hell it was. There was absolutely no scenario where failure would be acceptable. Ever since my early childhood, my parents had slaved away from sunrise to sunset, pinching every penny just to pay my astronomical tuition of 100,000 credits a year with nothing but their blistered hands. They never uttered a single word of complaint. But I was 18 now, and I understood the crushing weight of their sacrifices all too well. This was my moment, and I refused to let their 18 years of quiet agony end in vanity. I was the top student in my class, boasting the most formidable mental capacity in the entire school. I had every reason to believe in my own triumph. After passing through 2 rigorous security checkpoints, I finally stepped into the Grand Awakening Hall. Suspended in the very center was a massive, glowing blue sphere of light that stretched 10 meters wide. Inside its radiant depths, over 100 candidates floated with their eyes closed, deep in the process of awakening. All around me, teenagers of my own age waited anxiously, their voices hushed in tense whispers. My mental aptitude is the absolute lowest in our grade. I am completely finished, aren't I? Yeah, you are dead meat, my friend. Please, merciful God, just let me awaken. I would be deeply grateful even for a territory no larger than a standard bathroom. I chose to ignore their desperate chatter, finding a quiet corner to close my eyes and focus my thoughts. The more tranquil one's mental state during the awakening, the higher the probability of a successful outcome. I had only one shot at this, and I could not afford to squander a single fraction of a second. Next cohort. Candidates numbered 10365 through 10514. Assemble at the center of the hall immediately. My eyes snapped open instantly. My assigned number was 10366. It was my time to face destiny. Following a swift headcount and identity verification, our group marched into the luminous blue sphere one by one. There was a sensation like a soft, liquid splash. The moment my feet crossed the threshold, an abrupt weightlessness washed over me, resembling the sensation of falling deep into water. A strange, soothing fluid enveloped my entire body. A sudden wave of intense exhaustion washed over my mind. My heavy eyelids fluttered shut, and I drifted into a deep slumber. I could not tell how much time had passed before I finally opened my eyes once more. My heart skipped a violent beat. I found myself floating amidst a vast, silent sea of stars. Directly ahead of me hung an enormous, breathtaking planet, swirling with vibrant colors as it suspended itself in the void of space. The instructors had always taught us that seeing an image meant the awakening was a success. However, they also insisted that what a successful candidate should see was their personal territory. Yet all I could perceive was this colossal planet. There is no way my territory could possibly be this entire world, is there? I scoffed quietly at my own absurd delusion. But in that exact moment, a cold, mechanical voice detonated within my consciousness. Congratulations! You have successfully claimed your unique starting territory. Planet 0. Total territorial surface area, 10 billion square kilometers.
Territorial rank, SSSSSSSS.
My pupils contracted to pinpricks. 10 billion square kilometers. The entire surface of the Earth was a mere 500 million square kilometers. My personal domain was literally 20 times the size of my home planet. And then there was that rating, 9 S ranks. The most powerful individual in our entire nation had only managed to secure an A rank territory. Above A rank sat the legendary S rank. But my status displayed an unprecedented 9 S ranks. I whispered quietly to myself, gradually moving from absolute denial to slowly, piece by piece, accepting this impossible reality, because I could feel it with absolute clarity. A profound, unbreakable thread bound me directly to this celestial body. The planet was whispering to my very soul. The urge to plunge headfirst into its atmosphere was nearly overwhelming. I shook my head vigorously, dragging my consciousness back to reality. The moment one enters their territory for the first time, a brutal 7-day survival ordeal begins. I needed to return to the real world first and share the monumental news with my family. Outside the gates of the Awakening Center, my parents and Xiaohuan had been waiting alongside countless other anxious families for over 2 agonizing hours. Cohort after cohort of students filed out of the gates. The vast majority of them wore expressions of absolute despair, looking like walking corpses. Some broke down into hysterical tears the very instant they caught sight of their parents. Only a precious, fortunate few burst through the gates with ecstatic grins, desperate to share their triumph. Mom, I actually succeeded. 570 square meters. I am officially a lord. Is it true? Oh, my wonderful boy. You are absolutely brilliant. My father watched that tearful, joyous embrace, a wave of quiet envy washing over his eyes. Do not fret. Our boy is just as talented as anyone out there. My mother's voice was firm and reassuring. Yet, my father noticed that her hand, which tightly gripped her water bottle, was trembling uncontrollably. Another 30 minutes of agonizing waiting passed. Finally, another group of candidates emerged from the facility. Song. Over here. My father suddenly threw both of his arms into the air and roared at the top of his lungs. Dad! I sprinted through the crowd toward them. Big brother, did you do it? Xiaohuan was bouncing anxiously on the tips of her toes, her face filled with worry. I looked at their tense, desperate faces, and I gave them a firm, heavy nod. My mother grabbed my hand tightly, her voice cracking with emotion. You succeeded? Is it really true? It is true. I am a lord now. My throat tightened as a wave of emotion threatened to choke me. I had actually done it. Splendid. That is wonderful. My father clapped a heavy, trembling hand onto my shoulder, his eyes rimmed with red. This was a man who had never shed a single tear in his entire life. Come on, he laughed, his voice thick with emotion. Let us buy a pound of fresh beef and a whole fish too. Tonight, we feast in celebration. Hooray! We are finally having meat. Xiaohuan leaped high into the air with pure excitement. At the dinner table, my father, who had not touched a single drop of alcohol in 20 years, got completely and utterly drunk. That is, my boy. On the walk over, I wanted to ask you so many times, but your mother refused to let me. I just need to know. Your territory? How immense is it? You old drunkard. My mother's face darkened instantly. Just 2 sips of liquor and you are already speaking gibberish. Zhou Yun awakened successfully, and isn't that more than enough? Why must you pry so much? She placed a choice piece of beef directly into my bowl. Ignore your father. Eat.
He smiled warmly here.
It is fine, Mom. I know you did not ask because you were terrified my territory would be too small, and you did not want to wound my pride. But the absolute truth is, my territory is not small at all. In fact, It is terrifyingly massive. Do you see that? My father slammed his fist onto the table and let out a booming laugh. What did I tell you? How could my flesh and blood ever fall short? My mother chuckled softly and chided him. Listen to you boast. But I could see that the heavy anxiety she had carried all day had finally dissolved. Big brother, how massive is your territory, really? Xiaohuan tilted her head, curiosity shining in her eyes. It is not like 1,000 square meters, is it? Far too small. Guess higher. Then, 10,000 square meters? Still too small. Be much bolder. My mother could no longer sit still. 10,000 square meters is considered small? That alone is enough to qualify you for the national Tier 3 subsidy. Ah! My father took another massive swig of his drink. The two of you have absolutely no imagination. Do I not know my own son? Let me declare a number. 100,000 square meters. I shook my head with a wry smile. Dad, that is still far too small. Still too small. My father shot to his feet so abruptly that his wooden chair clattered violently against the floor. Son, do not go giving your old man a heart attack. That 100,000 square meters had been a wild, drunken exaggeration. He had never in his wildest dreams expected me to dismiss it as small. I looked at the three of them and stated with absolute seriousness. You might find this impossible to believe, but this time, my territory is an entire planet. The total area is 10 billion square kilometers. Xiaohuan, who was only in the 3rd grade, was completely stunned and immediately began counting on her tiny fingers. My parents' expressions froze in place. 1 second passed. 2 seconds passed. Ah! You cheeky brat. Now you are just pulling your old man's leg. My father picked up his fallen chair and sat back down with a chuckle. My mother simply shook her head with a gentle smile. They did not believe a single word, even though it was their own son delivering the news. Had I claimed 1 million square meters or even 10 million, they would have believed me without a shred of doubt. But 10 billion square kilometers? The entire planet Earth was only 500 million. I sighed quietly. I suppose I could not blame them. Truly was an incredibly difficult truth to digest. Even I felt as though I was trapped in a surreal dream. All right, the absolute truth this time. I feigned a look of helplessness. My territory is actually 1.3 million square meters. My father's hand froze. My mother gasped. Xiaohuan stared. Are you absolutely certain it is 1.3 million square meters? My father slowly set his cup down. I am certain. No jokes this time? He leaned forward across the table, staring intensely into my eyes. No jokes. The entire dining table fell into a stunned silence once more. Oh! My mother suddenly buried her face in her hands and began to weep quietly. Look at you. My father gently patted her back. This is the most joyous news we could have ever hoped for. And yet you are crying. My mother wiped her eyes clumsily. Who is crying? These are tears of pure joy. My son has truly made something of himself, and I am absolutely ecstatic. Big brother, 1.3 million square meters. Xiaohuan gazed at me as if she were looking at a stranger. Does that not qualify us for the national Tier 1 subsidy? Barring any unforeseen complications, yes, it does. I smiled warmly and nodded. We had been destitute. In order to grant me even a microscopic chance of becoming a lord, they had emptied their meager savings and sacrificed everything. Xiaohuan had suffered quietly as well. For her entire childhood, she had worn my old, faded hand-me-downs, played with the discarded toys I grew tired of, and even carried my worn-out backpack. I had never spoken of it aloud, but deep within my soul, I felt a profound sense of guilt toward her. Now everything would change. 100 million credits in national subsidies would be ours. From this day forward, our family's grim destiny would be completely rewritten. Where is my phone? Where did I put my phone? My mother began frantically rummaging through the drawers. We must share news of this magnitude with Teacher Huang immediately. You absolutely should. My father handed his phone over to her. Teacher Huang has watched over our boy with great care. Meanwhile, at Qinghe High School, inside the dimly lit teacher's office, Huang Shuguang sat staring blankly at the smartphone resting on his wooden desk. He had been staring at that screen since early morning, refusing to move even an inch. The official results should have been released hours ago. Yet he had not received a single phone call. What made the situation even more agonizing was that out of the 6 educators sharing the office, he was the only one met with silence. Every other teacher was constantly answering calls from triumphant students eager to share their success. Only he sat there, waiting in vain for a signal that never came. Do not take it to heart, old Huang. The grade director sauntered over, wearing a patronizing smirk, and patted him on the shoulder. This awakening trial is 50% talent and 50% pure luck. Sometimes, fortune simply does not favor you. There is nothing anyone can do. Take my class, for instance. 7 lords awakened in a single afternoon. I guess we were just a bit luckier. Huang Shuguang's chest tightened with irritation. This miserable old hypocrite was not trying to comfort him. He was merely gloating and rubbing salt into the wound. On any other afternoon, Huang would have retorted with sharp sarcasm. But today, he had absolutely no leverage to defend himself. Right at that moment, his phone vibrated violently. He snatched it off the desk in a flash, his eyes darting to the caller ID. It read, Zhou Yun's mother. His breathing grew shallow and erratic. Zhou Yun, the academic champion of the entire grade this year, and the one student he had placed all his hopes upon. This phone call had to be the breakthrough he was waiting for. He answered the call instantly, and the ecstatic voice of Zhou Yun's mother immediately echoed through the receiver. Teacher Huang, thanks to your 3 years of tireless guidance, my Zhou Yun has successfully awakened. He actually did it. Huang Shuguang bolted upright from his chair. Marvelous. That is absolutely spectacular. How massive is the territory? And what is its overall quality rating? He claims it is 1.3 million square meters. 1.3 million square meters? Huang Shuguang let out a deafening roar that nearly caused the eavesdropping grade director to drop his ceramic water cup. Yes, that is exactly what he told us. There is no mistake. Zhou Yun's mother sounded somewhat startled by the sheer volume of his shout. Ah! Huang Shuguang threw his head back and laughed like a man possessed by madness. There is absolutely no mistake. That boy Zhou Yun has never uttered a lie in his life. If he claims it is 1.3 million, then it is precisely 1.3 million. He qualifies for the National Tier 1 subsidy. In the entire history of our nation, a territory of this scale comfortably ranks within the top 3. The top 3. Rest assured, securing this subsidy is my sacred duty as his homeroom teacher. I will personally ensure the paperwork is processed with the utmost urgency. He terminated the call and raised his head, only to realize that the entire office staff had gathered around his desk without him noticing. Even more teachers and administrative staff were crowding around the doorway outside. Old Huang, is this the absolute truth? 1.3 million square meters? Your student, Zhou Yun? If this is genuine, the boy is destined to become a pillar of the state. Good heavens, the combined territories of all 5 lords in my class do not even make up a fraction of his. The grade director slithered forward, his face completely masked in a sycophantic grin. Old Huang, regarding the filing of this Tier 1 subsidy, why don't you hand the task over to me? You have been utterly exhausted these past few days. As your director, it is only right that I shoulder some of this heavy burden for you. That will not be necessary, thank you. Huang Shuguang smiled with immense pride, grabbed his smartphone and his coat, and walked straight toward the exit. And monumental honor like this was something only a complete fool would ever dream of handing over to someone else. At the Municipal Administrative Center, a massive line snaked out the door. On any ordinary day, no matter how urgent his business, he would have had to wait his turn like everyone else. But today was different. I am here to file an application for the National Tier 1 subsidy on behalf of my student. Would you all mind letting me pass? The moment those words left his mouth, a sudden, dead silence descended upon the entire lobby. The crowd instantly parted, carving a clear path directly to the front desk. In less than 5 minutes, every single piece of complex bureaucracy was fully completed. By 4:30 that afternoon, Huang Shuguang was personally leading a delegation of high-ranking Qinghe city officials, with the city governor himself at the front, straight to our modest apartment. My parents had never in their lives encountered such powerful figures. They were so utterly overwhelmed that they stood there nervously, not knowing what to do with their hands. Yet, to their complete shock, these powerful dignitaries behaved with immense warmth and humility, treating my family as though they were cherished lifelong friends. That night, I lay in my bed clutching the testing crystal that the city governor had personally placed into my hands. I tossed and turned, completely unable to find sleep. Mere words meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. My simple claim of possessing 1.3 million square meters held no official weight. I had to physically transport this testing crystal into my territory to conduct an official systemic measurement. Once I returned with the validated crystal, the astronomical subsidy would finally be unlocked. There was only one final step remaining. There was only one remaining milestone to cross before the dream became reality. Once that state subsidy was officially cleared, the grueling poverty of my family's existence would be utterly dismantled. Furthermore, there was a crucial detail to keep in mind. The moment a lord crossed over into their newly assigned domain, a brutal 7-day trial of survival was initiated, during which all retreat back to Earth was strictly sealed off. Tomorrow marked the designated day when our entire graduating cohort of lords would make the leap, plunging into our respective territories simultaneously. A world of such unimaginable scale. What dark secrets or immense fortunes lay in wait for me? With my mind heavy with reckless ambitions, I drifted into a profound, dreamless slumber. The morning chimed at precisely 7 o'clock. I bid a brief, solemn farewell to my family before initiating the consciousness link to my territory right on schedule. A blinding flash erupted. A violent surge of incandescent radiance tore through my vision. The physical world warped into a sickening spiral, and my consciousness collapsed into the dark. Squee, squee. I was pulled back to reality by a chorus of high-pitched, pathetic little squeals echoing nearby. The moment my eyelids snapped open, my survival instincts flared. I launched myself backward, instantly dropping into a low, defensive combat stance. A lord is never more vulnerable than during those first chaotic seconds of planetary arrival. As it happened, my paranoid posture was utterly pointless. Directly in front of me was a small crowd of vibrantly colored, moist, glistening blobs of jelly. Squee, squee. They rebounded merrily off the damp earth, their oversized, glassy eyes blinking in sheer wonderment at the bizarre, alien biped that had just materialized out of thin air. I flicked my wrist to invoke the identification protocol. A dull chime echoed in my mind as a semi-translucent interface, visible only to my eyes, flickered into existence. Water element slime, rank F, level 3, attributes: Strength 1, Endurance 1, Wisdom 1, Spirit 1, Speed 1, Innate talent. Water element affinity. Description: one of the absolute lowest rungs of the ecological ladder. It is entirely incapable of aggression, existing solely to be preyed upon. Extremely cowardly by nature, it survives by huddling with its peers for collective warmth. Every single attribute was locked at a pathetic rating of 1. They were agonizingly fragile. I exhaled a long breath, but a heavy, cold weight settled in my chest. The latent potential of any territory is intrinsically bound to the grades of the organisms thriving within it. This planetary anomaly had been designated with an unprecedented rating of 9 S ranks, yet the very first denizens I encountered were a pack of defenseless pushovers boasting single-digit statistics. I began to harbor dark suspicions that the legendary 9S rating was merely an artificial metric inflated by the planet's sheer, bloated physical volume. If I were forced to employ this useless rabble as my foundational military force, the agonizingly slow pace of my territorial development was easily predictable. Just as these grim thoughts swirled through my head, that cold, familiar, monotonous voice chimed in the recesses of my skull. Welcome to your sovereign territory, Planet Zero. The 7-day adaptation phase is now active. During this period, leaving your designated domain is strictly prohibited. 10 basic militia conversion talismans have been successfully transferred to your personal Lord dimension. The information module, Lord network, and trade market interfaces have been unlocked. The Academy had drilled these standard operating procedures into our heads for years, so the system alerts barely registered as a surprise. The real prize was the collection of 10 conversion seals. They represented the absolute bedrock of my future expansion. I could not tolerate wasting even a single specimen of such valuable starting capital. A pale, ghostly light shimmered across my fingertips as a crude, ash-white paper seal materialized in my palm. I cast a cold glance over the gathering of pastel-colored slimes before quietly vanishing the seal back into my spatial storage. A mere 10 talismans were all I possessed. They were quite literally priceless. To squander such precious items on these bottom-feeding weaklings would be an absolute tragedy. I resolved to search for better prospects. I shook my head to clear the frustration, gripped the heavy tactical knife pulled from my survival pack, and began marching due east. Securing a capable vanguard and escalating raw military might as swiftly as humanly possible was the cardinal rule of survival for any rookie lord. But these slimes were a joke. To bind them to my service would be an unmitigated waste of resources. The ecology of Planet Zero was overwhelmingly rich, choked with towering, dense vegetation that blocked the sky. I carved a path slowly down a narrow, shadowy game trail. To my utter bewilderment, the gaggle of gelatinous slimes actually began bouncing along in my wake. When I advanced, they hopped forward. When I paused, they wobbled to a halt. I was caught between sheer amusement and profound exasperation. Nevertheless, I refrained from chasing them away. In part, their harmless antics were strangely endearing in this desolate place. More practically, primitive creatures often possessed hypersensitive survival instincts that could serve as an early warning system. Barely 3 minutes into the trek, the slimes abruptly scattered, throwing themselves into the underbrush. A few of them emitted hushed, panicked squeaks, gesturing wildly toward me as if pleading with me to seek cover. My own senses had registered nothing, but I chose to put my faith in these native denizens. I slipped behind the massive trunk of a nearby tree and suppressed my breathing entirely. Only then did the sound reach my ears. A low, rhythmic, heavy respiration. It was the unmistakable sound of a large beast deep in slumber. My pulse began to quicken with anticipation. A formidable beast brought lethal danger, but it also offered a monumental opportunity. If I could subjugate it and forge it into my first unit, my operational power would experience an immediate, astronomical leap. Furthermore, the inherent potential of my first thrall would establish the absolute ceiling for this territory's future expansion. After all, one could hardly expect to cultivate a colony of useless slimes into a legion capable of shattering worlds. I advanced on silent tiptoes, parting the thick foliage. Moments later, the source of the heavy breathing came into view. An immense bear, blanketed in a thick coat of shimmering golden fur, lay curled in a deep, snoring sleep. Its colossal frame spanned at least 3 meters in length. Even in its vulnerable state of rest, its sheer physical presence exerted an oppressive, suffocating pressure. I swept another identification scan over its massive form. Schwantu bear, rank, B, level, 2, attributes. Strength 26, Endurance 33, Wisdom 4, Spirit 5, Speed 17. Innate talent, Density, reduces all incoming damage by 20%. Active skill, Chain Palm Strike. Description: a relatively passive ursine beast. It is highly unlikely to initiate hostility unless provoked, with exceptions made only for fresh fish and sweet honey. B rank, My heart missed a beat. Waking up to a pathetic gathering of F-rank weaklings had nearly snuffed out my hope. Who could have foreseen that my fortunes would pivot so spectacularly? In a standard, run-of-the-mill territory, one would be lucky to encounter anything beyond F-E or D-rank specimens. A B-rank monster was a mythic rarity. Only a privileged handful of elite, high-tier territories possessed such creatures within their borders. And the masters of those territories, from what I recalled, were almost exclusively powerhouse figures ranked within the global top 1,000. I stared intently at the sleeping behemoth, deliberately calming my breath, as a wild, intoxicating thought took root in my mind. Was it truly possible that I had a legitimate path to join the ranks of humanity's supreme elite? 3 centuries ago, an apocalyptic cataclysm fundamentally shattered the world we knew. Voracious, demonic calamities shrouded in abyssal mist descended from the heavens, reducing entire ecosystems to barren, lifeless ash. The entirety of humanity's modern arsenal proved utterly impotent, forcing our species to retreat step by bloody step. Just as the end seemed absolute, an immense monolith descended from the cosmos, bestowing upon us the system of Lord Awakening. Lords could raise realms beyond our own, funneling or untamed beast armies back home to hold the line. Only with this power did humanity initiate its desperate counteroffensive, erecting fortified bastions and holding the line to this very day. The bear's ribs rose and fell under the moonlight, slow and unbothered, close enough now that I could count the breaths. It was the lords, wave after wave of them, throwing their lives into the meat grinder to forge a future out of raw sacrifice. No gods came for us. The lords did, and I was one throw of a seal away from standing among them. And I, Zhou Yun, was currently standing at the precipice of that very same divine path. The weight of that realization made my eyes burn with a fierce, ambitious light. I released a quiet, tense command as I hurled the conversion seal, watching it streak like a shooting star toward the resting Schwanta bear. A target caught in deep slumber possessed the absolute minimum psychic resistance. There would never be a more flawless window of opportunity to strike. A heavy, resonant hum filled the air. An ash-gray energy expanded to envelop the massive bulk of the Schwanta bear. 1 agonizing second passed. Then 2. The sprawling radiance abruptly imploded, sinking deep into the beast's golden flesh. Congratulations! You have successfully subjugated the Schwanta bear as your basic militia unit. The giant bear slowly parted its heavy eyelids, staring down at its own massive, clawed paws in utter bewilderment. It then raised its gaze to meet mine as I approached, its large face a comical picture of utter confusion. "Shake hands," I instructed, extending my right hand toward it. With surprising gentleness, the massive beast lifted its heavy right paw and gingerly placed it into my palm. While it possessed no understanding of human speech, our newly forged telepathic link conveyed my intent flawlessly, commanding its absolute loyalty. It let out a soft, rumbling grunt, sinking low to the ground before nuzzling its colossal head against my chest. I threw my arms around its thick, golden-furred neck, letting out a genuine laugh. Theoretical knowledge acquired in a classroom was one thing, but experiencing the raw magic of this bond was something entirely different. The inexplicable, profound tether linking my consciousness to this massive predator was intoxicating. You are my very first ally, even if you look incredibly silly. From this day forth, you shall be known as Big Bear. Though the beast failed to comprehend the name, it nodded its massive head in enthusiastic agreement. Squee! Squee! The pack of pastel-hued slimes had crept back out from hiding, narrowing their big eyes as they hopped excitedly in what looked like a celebration of my success. A profound sense of triumph welled up within me. My initial step into this uncharted world had proceeded with an ease that bordered on the miraculous. Subjugating a B-rank Schwanta bear with a single, basic talisman was an absurd stroke of luck. Now it was time to establish the baseline of my operation. Big Bear, take this tool and fell that tree over there. I pulled a survival axe from my tactical gear, pressed it into its massive grip, and executed a few mock chopping swings to illustrate the task. The supernatural utility of the Lord-vassal bond proved itself instantly. Big Bear was a wild beast that had never seen a tool in its life, yet the moment my intent was transmitted, it grasped the handle with its claws. It reared back onto its massive hind legs with surprising coordination and delivered a powerful downward strike against the nearest trunk. Thwack! Asterisk. The dense bark suffered a shallow 1 centimeter indentation. However, the steel head of my military axe had completely shattered, leaving a massive, jagged chip in the blade. I froze in absolute disbelief. This specialized axe had been retrieved from the premium survival kit gifted directly by the city governor himself. It was supposed to represent the pinnacle of modern human metallurgy. Yet a single impact had ruined it. Something was fundamentally wrong here. With narrowing eyes, I cast an identification scan on the plain-looking tree. Green Plains fir. Rank. C. Resource value. 20 gold coins. Recycling. C-rank timber. I inhaled a sharp, cold breath. Conditioned by standard logic, I had assumed these ordinary, weathered trees covering the landscape were F or E-rank junk fit only for basic fuel. Who could have possibly predicted that a casual swing of an axe would strike a rare, high-grade treasure? The market valuations back home were perfectly clear in my memory. A single, raw log of C-rank material could easily command a 6-figure fortune in Earth's currencies. And yet, as I cast my gaze across the horizon, these exact trees stretched out in a vast, unending ocean. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I began frantically casting scans on every object in my vicinity. The jagged rocks, the wild weeds, the exotic flora, and the surrounding timber. The diagnostic results left my hands trembling uncontrollably. These seemingly mundane plants and stones were, at their absolute lowest, D-rank resources. C-rank materials comprised the overwhelming majority of the foliage, with intermittent clusters of B-rank and even A-rank materials casually scattered throughout the brush. This was no mere wilderness. This was a literal, boundless mountain of untapped gold. In that single, breathtaking instant, the truth finally dawned on me. This was the reason my sovereign domain had been designated with a mythic 9S rating. Invaluable, high-grade treasures literally carpeted the earth across an unimaginably massive territory. The 9S rating was not an exaggeration. It was a conservative estimate. However, a glaring logistical bottleneck immediately reared its head. Having a forest of C-rank timber was an incredible fortune, but how was I supposed to harvest it? If the finest alloyed survival axe from Earth shattered on the first swing, conventional logging was out of the question. I let out a breathless, self-deprecating laugh. I suppose one could classify this as the highly enviable problems of the obscenely wealthy. Big Bear seemed to intuitively grasp my frustration. It discarded the broken iron tool, unleashed a deep, deafening roar, and slammed its massive, clawed paw straight into the trunk of the Green Plains fir. Boom! Asterisk the ancient fir, whose trunk was thick enough to require 2 grown men to clasp hands around it, shuddered violently down to its roots. Rawr! Refusing to stop at a single blow, Big Bear raised both massive forepaws, unleashing a relentless barrage of heavy strikes like a localized hurricane. Boom! 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 Asterisk the brutal assault continued for a solid 30 seconds before the structural integrity of the Green Plains fir finally gave way. With a deafening, splintering crack, the massive trunk collapsed, crashing heavily to the forest floor. Incredible work! I offered Big Bear a highly appreciative thumbs up. To fell a high-density, C-rank tree with nothing but raw, muscular force was a feat worthy of a B-rank beast. Though Big Bear was drawing heavy, ragged breaths from the physical exertion, the valuable timber was now successfully harvested. Yet, utilizing such precious, high-grade timber to construct a basic starting shelter would be a crime against efficiency. I redirected my focus toward the Lord Network interface. This global network allowed lords across different worlds to communicate, share intel, and exchange resources. While I lacked standard, low-grade wood, there were bound to be countless others who possessed nothing else. A cold, calculating smile tugged at the corner of my lips as I accessed the public communications channel. A chaotic torrent of messages scrolled past my eyes in a dizzying blur. Help! I've spawned on a barren, deserted reef with nothing but a single withered tree. How do I survive this? Urgently awaiting advice. Fell the tree, build a raft, and pray to the gods. Can anyone tell me why my starting settlement is populated entirely by frail elderly folk? An ancient vanguard unit? That's actually impressive in its own tragic way. This has to be a joke. My territory is literally a small, tiled bathroom. What am I even supposed to build here? At least you have water. You won't perish from dehydration. Gross. I observed the scrolling text for several minutes, quickly realizing the public forum was flooded with pathetic sob stories and desperate pleas for rescue. It made logical sense. Any capable lord worth their salt was currently focusing all their energy on securing their borders and gathering resources. Who among the elite would waste precious time idle-chatting in a public lobby? The individuals posting on the network were almost exclusively those who had hit an immediate dead end in their development. I had absolutely no intention of participating in their pointless misery. I uploaded the verified item profile of the Green Plains fur directly into the trading market, offering 1 unit of C-rank Green Plains fur. Seeking standard F-rank construction timber. The instant my listing went live, the chat feed erupted into an absolute frenzy. Is this a joke? C-rank premium timber on day 1. Who in their right mind trades away high-grade resources this early in the trial? Is this guy insane? Shut up and let the man trade. What does it matter to you? I'll bid 10 units of F-rank pine right now. I'll offer 30 units of F-rank hardwood. Add me as a friend, brother. This is an absolute powerhouse. Discarding C-rank materials like their common weeds implies his territory's output is astronomical. Beep, beep, beep. Asterisk. An avalanche of direct messages and friend requests inundated my notification box, the numbers ticking upward exponentially. The reaction was entirely within my expectations. In this brutal system, no one was a fool. Every aspiring lord understood the terrifying implications of a player offering C-rank resources on the very first day. Securing a connection with such a figure was a golden ticket to survival. Sifting through the mountain of offers, I locked onto the highest bid of 30 units of basic wood. The sender was registered under the name Liang Kuan. 30 units of standard F-rank timber were valued at roughly 150,000 credits on Earth, which perfectly matched the raw market value of a single C-rank log. It was a remarkably fair trade. 30 units of F-rank red oak in exchange for your C-rank fur. Do we have a deal?
Liang kun messaged.
Deal, I replied briefly. I initiated the secure transaction interface. Liang Kuan responded with lightning speed, depositing 30 hefty logs of basic red oak into the transfer slot without a moment's hesitation. I tapped the confirmation prompt. The system finalized the exchange instantly. Transaction complete. Lost. Green Plains Fur X1. Gained. Red Oak X30. If you ever require more standard building materials, contact me first. I'll always offer you the best rates. Liang Kuan sent. Understood, I replied before closing the chat. Meanwhile, across the dimensional expanse, on a world featuring a massive logging settlement, Liang Kuan sat perched atop a colossal mountain of harvested pine, his hand trembling slightly as he stroked the smooth, dense bark of the newly acquired Green Plains fir. He was utterly unable to conceal the greedy excitement stretching across his face. This Zhou Yun. I can't tell if he's an absolute idiot or if he's simply swimming in so many legendary resources that he doesn't care. Trading away pristine C-rank lumber during the first hours of the survival phase is pure madness. Who in their right mind trades away C-rank timber during the critical inception phase of their territory? Does this brainless idiot not realize that these materials are absolute prerequisites for erecting a hero tavern later down the line? Well, his sheer incompetence is my stroke of absolute fortune. Without brain-dead fools like him running around, I would never have secured such a ludicrous bargain. Once I accumulate 20 more units of this timber, I can elevate my lord level to rank 5, which will finally unlock the blueprint for the hero tavern. The moment I summon my very first hero, who in this godforsaken world will have the strength to challenge my claim as the supreme lord of this generation. After securing the precious red oak, I refrained from starting the construction on the spot. Instead, I commanded Big Bear to guide me toward a suitable clearing in the dense foliage. Calling it an open clearing was a generous stretch, as it barely spanned 100 square meters. Yet, within a suffocating forest choked by monolithic trees, finding even this much empty space was a miracle. Venturing any deeper into the wilderness would consume precious hours and invite unpredictable, lethal hazards. It simply wasn't worth the gamble. This modest patch of dirt would have to suffice. Standing on the eastern edge of the clearing, I activated the blueprint for the militia conversion station. A brilliant flash of gilded light erupted, and a shimmering pale gold spectral frame materialized out of thin air. All that remained was to feed it the necessary timber to advance the construction progress. I left the exhausting physical labor entirely to Big Bear. The massive beast let out a low, reverberating roar. He stood on his hind legs, pounding his massive chest to show his eager compliance, before hefting the heavy red oak logs onto his shoulders. As the first timber settled into place, a glowing interface box materialized in my field of vision. Construction progress, 5%. Estimated time, 20 minutes. A mere 20 minutes? I blinked in disbelief at the sheer speed of it, then shrugged off my surprise. Big Bear was, after all, a B-rank Schwanta bear boasting an impressive 26 points of strength at just level 2. His raw physical parameters completely eclipsed those of any standard human militia. Naturally, his efficiency would be monstrous. Such was the undeniable beauty of superior baseline attributes. High-pitched squeaks echoed through the clearing. The slimes desperately wanted to prove their worth, bouncing frantically around the building frame and rolling up to the logs. Unfortunately, their pitifully low attributes rendered them useless. Even a dozen of the squishy creatures working in unison couldn't nudge a single red oak log by an inch. Big Bear, currently hoisting another massive log, took notice of their struggles. He planted both heavy paws on his hips and let out a guttural rumble that sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. His expression was a picture-perfect mockery of the little creature's utter lack of self-awareness. The slimes deflated in unison, their jelly-like bodies drooping with profound sorrow. "Big Bear, behave," I chided gently. I stepped forward to offer the dejected slimes a reassuring pat. They were undeniably fragile, but their lively and endearing nature was hard to ignore. If their baseline parameters were even a fraction higher, I would have seriously considered converting them. My gentle encouragement worked wonders, and they immediately bounced back to life, joyfully swirling around my ankles. Exactly 20 minutes flew by. Congratulations! You have successfully constructed a militia conversion station. Militia conversion station. Draw in regional creatures of a matching species and assimilate them into your defense force. I promptly designated it as a Schwanta bear militia conversion station. A wooden placard featuring a crude, cartoonish depiction of a Schwanta bear appeared over the facility's entrance. I nodded in quiet satisfaction. Every choice I had made up to this point was paying off. Manually felling high-grade timber would have exhausted our stamina completely. By bartering away my premium timber for basic construction materials, I had preserved our physical reserves and drastically accelerated our development curve. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like a disadvantageous transaction, but in truth, it was a masterful strategic victory. With this specialized conversion station active, wild Schwanta bears roaming the surrounding forest would be drawn to my territory and integrated into my forces. The momentum was building, and my snowball was finally rolling. Most novice lords struggled to recruit even basic troops, forced to perform backbreaking manual labor themselves just to survive. I, however, had secured a B-rank beast right out of the gate, and soon, an entire pack of iron-tough bears would be executing my commands. At this rate of progression, I would leave every competitor eating my dust. I was still indulging in these grand delusions when a violent, unnatural gale suddenly swept through the clearing. The ancient, massive trees around us bent at terrifying angles. The newly erected wooden structure groaned and creaked under the sudden atmospheric pressure. Big Bear instantly threw his massive bulk in front of me, letting out a series of hostile, low growls aimed directly toward the northern horizon. Beside us, the lightweight slimes were violently swept off the ground by the sheer force of the wind. A cold dread crawled down my spine. This tempest was far from natural. An entity of catastrophic power was rapidly approaching our coordinates. A piercing, deafening shriek shattered the heavens. A crimson speck materialized in the sky like a descending meteor, and before I could even blink, it occupied the airspace directly above us. A wave of scorching, superheated wind incinerated the air, forcing the surrounding trees to groan under intolerable strain. Big Bear buried all four claws deep into the earth to anchor himself, yet the sheer force of the wind dragged him backward. His claws carved for deep, jagged trenches into the dirt as he struggled to stand his ground. Shielded behind his massive frame, I remained relatively unscathed. The mortal danger, however, had only just begun. Less than 100 meters away, perched atop a massive canopy, a majestic avian creature shrouded in blazing crimson plumage glared down at us. Merely locked in its piercing gaze, my blood turned to ice. I realized with terrifying clarity that my survival was entirely at its mercy. If a B-rank beast like Big Bear existed, it was only logical that higher-tier monsters roamed this world. I had anticipated this reality, but I never expected to face it on my very first day. I activated my scan skill. If I was destined to perish here, I would at least die knowing what killed me. Given its terrifying velocity, fleeing was an absolute impossibility even if I had wings of my own. To survive, I had to understand my enemy and search for even the slimmest path to survival. Blazing Sun Divine Bird. Rank: SSS. Level: Strength? Endurance? Speed? Talent? Skill? Description: the darling of the heavens and the sun, a proud sovereign of primordial flames that tolerates no disrespect to its divine majesty. My chest throbbed with a frantic, desperate rhythm. Aside from its basic name and description, every single statistic was replaced by cold, mocking question marks. The system was entirely unable to analyze the creature. This meant the chasm in our respective power levels was so vast that my scanning ability couldn't even register a reading. An SSS rank entity. I recalled the records of Earth with absolute clarity. The strongest creature ever bound to a human lord back home was a mere S rank. Even the legendary calamity beasts that had ravaged humanity for 3 centuries were led by a king of only SS rank. Yet here I was, having barely established my territory, staring directly at an SSS rank god. What kind of nightmarish realm had I been thrown into? Was it possible that my 9S rated starting territory had spawned a corresponding 9S tier nightmare? On Earth, a single SS rank calamity beast could effortlessly slaughter a professional army of 10,000. The sheer destructive potential of an SSS rank existence was something I dared not even conceptualize. Just as my mind began to spiral into absolute despair, the blazing Sun Divine Bird let out a loud, sudden burp. A concentrated sphere of incandescent plasma erupted from its beak. The spark bloomed into a raging inferno as it caught the wind, and in a mere heartbeat, it reduced a massive expanse of the southern forest to ash. The majestic beast let out another high-pitched whistle, seemingly much more satisfied after relieving its indigestion. It cast a brief, indifferent glance in my direction, beat its massive wings, and transformed into a streak of crimson starlight that vanished over the western horizon. Long after its departure, I remained frozen in place, my clothes completely drenched in cold sweat. That was a brush with absolute annihilation. Its immense pride saved me, as it didn't even deem me worthy of its hostility. Yet, if that casual burp had been angled even a fraction of a degree in our direction, we would have been vaporized instantly alongside the southern woodlands. A soft, trembling squeak broke the silence. The slimes gingerly rolled back toward me, their translucent bodies sporting various minor injuries that made them look incredibly pathetic. Suddenly, several fire element slimes began leaping excitedly into the air, frantically pointing towards the freshly incinerated wasteland to the south. "Do you want me to investigate that area?" I asked, translating their frantic gestures. Their squeaks intensified as they began bouncing forward, acting as eager guides. Still harboring deep reservations, Big Bear and I reluctantly followed their lead. Slimes possessed an incredibly acute biological radar for impending peril. If they were willing to march toward the blast zone, the immediate danger had likely passed. We walked only a short distance before arriving at the edge of the destruction. The once lush, vibrant canopy had been reduced to a barren wasteland of smoking black charcoal. I shook my head in dismay, doubting anything could have survived such localized stellar temperatures. The closer we drew to the impact center, the more unbearable the radiant heat became. Even though we were still on the periphery, sweat poured from my brow, and the ground felt like a literal iron griddle beneath my boots. The fire element slimes, however, were entirely unfazed. Completely immune to heat and combustion, they eagerly bounced forward into the glowing embers. They traveled deep into the smoking crater until they were mere crimson specks in the distance. Suddenly, they halted and began digging furiously into the superheated earth. After several minutes of intensive labor, they erupted into a chorus of high-pitched cheers, carrying a glowing red crystal as they bounced back to me. "Did you lead me here specifically for this object?" I wondered aloud. One of the slimes proudly pushed the blazing mineral into my open palm. Its tactile warmth and radiant appearance screamed of mythic origins. I focused my gaze to scan the item. Blazing Sun Breath Crystal. Rank S. Description: a condensed cluster of pure solar energy discharged from the blazing sun divine bird. A consumable explosive. Upon activation, inflicts 1,000 points of fire damage per second to all targets within range for 10 seconds. System exchange value: 200,000 gold coins. I drew in a sharp, cold breath. 1,000 points of damage per second, sustained over 10 seconds. Big Bear, with his robust 33 points of endurance, possessed a maximum health pool of 330 points. Even with his monstrous physical defense, he would be reduced to ashes in less than half a second. With a swift flick of my wrist, I deposited the volatile explosive straight into my lord space. Keeping such an unstable, catastrophic weapon in my bare hands made my palms itch with anxiety. I looked down at the fire slimes, who had puffed out their gelatinous chests in anticipation of praise. A genuine smile broke across my face. They had accomplished an invaluable feat today. A competent ruler must maintain an absolute system of merit-based rewards. Even with my currently meager inventory, I had to compensate them properly. I unzipped my survival pack and emptied its contents onto the scorched ground. I spread out a plastic lighter, a tactical flashlight, military biscuits, and some energy gel packs. "Go ahead, choose whatever catches your eye," I offered. The slimes stared at the assortment of strange human artifacts, their simplistic eyes darting back and forth in deep confusion. Were none of these items to their liking? I felt a twinge of disappointment. Suddenly, one of the fiery slimes locked its gaze onto the shiny energy jelly packets. It extended a translucent, stubby pseudopod and gave me an authoritative, firm nod. "So, you prefer the jelly?" I chuckled. It made perfect sense, considering their own bodies shared the same gelatinous consistency. "Go on, give it a try," I said, tearing open the packaging. The little creature glanced around cautiously before launching itself upward to swallow the packet whole. Its body contorted and wriggled as it processed the snack inside. With a wet spit, it ejected the empty plastic wrapper, having completely digested the contents. It closed its eyes, its face radiating pure, unadulterated ecstasy. In the blink of an eye, a soft radiance enveloped its body. Its superficial wounds began healing at a visible pace. My mind went blank. Even if I had never witnessed this in person, The visual cue was unmistakable. This was the characteristic light of a level up. Yet, the reality seemed impossible. In all of documented history, creatures could only accumulate experience through lethal combat. Gaining levels by consuming cheap earth confectionery was utterly preposterous. I quickly initiated a scan to verify my suspicions. Fire element slime. Rank F. Level 4. It had actually advanced from level 3 to level 4. Was it possible the creature was simply on the very cusp of a natural breakthrough? Even with the hard data staring me in the face, I struggled to accept such an absurd premise. To test the theory, I tore open a second packet of energy gel. Before I could even offer it, another nearby slime lunged forward and swallowed it in a single gulp. I stood there, caught between amusement and disbelief. Sure enough, a vibrant golden light soon bathed its translucent form. A quick scan confirmed its new status. Level 4. This was no statistical anomaly. The energy jelly was a literal cheat code. My heart began to pound with excitement. I rapidly fed 3 additional gel packs to the newly leveled slime. Upon consuming the third packet, its level instantly surged from 4 to 7. An entirely unprecedented exploit had just presented itself to me. I watched the overstuffed slime let out a tiny burp, looking frustrated that its physical capacity could hold no more. My mind began working at lightning speed, calculating the sheer potential of this discovery. Granted, slimes possessed terrible baseline stats, and F-rank growth was statistically abysmal. A single level up only yielded a meager 1-point attribute increase. However, the ease of their cultivation was utterly game-breaking. 1 cheap packet of gel equated to 1 guaranteed level. In the human world, these specific performance gels retailed for a mere 30 yuan. While slightly expensive for a snack, it was practically free real estate compared to the cost of standard power scaling. 30 yuan in exchange for a permanent stat increase. Any human lord would gladly sacrifice their own sanity for such an exchange rate. If I leveraged my access to Earth's supply lines, I could cultivate an army of high-level slimes at a minimal cost. I only faced 2 minor bottlenecks: my inventory limit when transporting goods from Earth, and the biological limits of the slime's digestion. Currently, a single slime maxed out its consumption at 4 packs, and the digestion cycle remained an unknown variable. Even with those limits, this was an incredibly broken method for scaling military might. However, I had to suppress the urge to mass-produce slime soldiers immediately. I had only recently arrived in this perilous world. My immediate objective remained reaching level milestones, securing blueprints, and fortifying my base to survive the initial 7-day grace period. Furthermore, my current stock of energy gels was highly limited. I decided to stick to my original plan and construct a residence. Both the residence and the militia conversion station were basic blueprints unlocked at level 1. While the station recruited forces, the residence was critical for maintaining their morale and loyalty. If troops were left unsheltered and starved, their loyalty would inevitably plummet. A severe drop in loyalty would trigger desertion or an outright rebellion. Most importantly, establishing one of each basic structure would trigger my advancement to level 2, unlocking the lumber mill, mine, and granary. Constructing the residence required 20 units of standard timber. Once again, I put Big Bear's monstrous strength to work as my primary logger. The sound of groaning would fill the air, followed by a resonant crash as another green plains fir fell. I harvested the lumber and immediately initiated a trade with Liang Kuan. I exchanged 1 unit of green plains fir for 30 units of premium red oak. Without a moment of rest, Big Bear pivoted directly into the construction process. Another 20 minutes elapsed. Congratulations! You have successfully constructed a residence. Residence restores 5 points of health and 5 points of loyalty to garrison forces every night. Capacity 0/4. Immediately afterward, a blinding pillar of golden light erupted from my own body. Requirements met. Residence X1 and Militia Conversion Station X1 completed. Lord level advanced to level 2. Acquired skill, Combat Sync. Lord space expanded.
Blueprints unlocked. Lumber mill, mine, Grenere.
I eagerly pulled up my character interface to review my new statistics. Name Zhou Yun. Level 2. Strength 7. Endurance 6. Wisdom 8. Spirit 17. Speed 7. Skills: Scan, Combat Sync. Blueprints: Residence, Militia Conversion Station. Subordinates: Schwan to Bear X1. My loyal subjects currently consisted of a single Schwan to Bear. Then, I turned my attention to a newly unlocked ability. Combat Sync was its name, a powerful skill allowing me to link with any subordinate under my command and temporarily inherit their raw physical attributes. The catch was a restrictive 5-day cooldown period. At long last, I possessed a reliable means of self-defense in this unforgiving wilderness. Without wasting a single moment, I initiated the link with Big Bear. Almost instantly, a torrential flood of overwhelming vigor and raw physical power surged through my veins. Just as I was reveling in this intoxicating sensation of power, the slimes that had been hovering peacefully in the distance began bouncing frantically back toward me in sheer terror. The thick foliage directly behind them erupted, and 3 gargantuan, botanical monstrosities resembling cauliflowers burst into the clearing. I called them cauliflowers, though they were obviously some bizarre, unidentified species native to this world. They moved on stubby limbs, yet their grotesque heads and torsos were dead ringers for the common garden vegetable. "Squee!" shrieked a panicked water slime, barely evading the snapping jaws of the lead beast by a hair's breadth. The situation was immediately clear. These vegetable abominations viewed my gelatinous neighbors as nothing more than convenient snacks. I couldn't allow that to happen. These slimes were not only the first friendly faces I had encountered in this alien realm, but they had also assisted me previously, making them prime candidates for future recruitment into my territory. Sensing my intent, Big Bear let loose a thunderous roar and launched his massive frame forward. "Cha-cha-cha!" hissed the 3 vegetable monsters, completely unfazed as they began to spin rapidly, transforming their leafy bodies into deadly, rotating tops. With a heavy impact, Big Bear swatted one of them through the air with a single swipe of his paw, though the razor-sharp leaves of the spinning beast managed to slash his glossy golden fur, leaving bloody gashes behind. A sharp pang of worry tightened in my chest. "Big Bear, pull back," I commanded. Pulling a heavy steel saber from my dimensional inventory, I charged directly toward the remaining 2 vegetable beasts. I swung the weapon in a rapid, defensive arc like a steel windmill. Closing the distance rapidly, I delivered a powerful diagonal slash. A sharp, metallic resonance echoed through the clearing as my blade met their defenses. The moment my steel bit into them, the 2 monsters spun even faster, their hardened leaves deflecting the blow like iron armor. Had I attempted this before sinking my stats, I likely wouldn't have even scratched their tough hides. Now, however, bolstered by a raw strength stat of 26, the playing field was entirely different. Following a brief, grinding deadlock, my heavy blade shore straight through their defenses, spraying thick, emerald green sap across the grass. Just then, the first cauliflower beast, which had recovered from Big Bear's initial blow, slipped behind me and began spinning toward my exposed back. I cursed internally as my overextended posture left me completely unable to pivot or dodge the incoming strike. I braced myself to absorb the impact using my newly boosted endurance of 33, but Big Bear's furious roar suddenly shattered the air. In a flash of golden fur, his massive body lunged forward to shield me completely. A heavy crash resounded, kicking up a thick cloud of dust and debris. Stumbling back a few paces, I quickly turned to assess the situation. The cowardly monster had been pinned flat against the dirt under Big Bear's immense weight. Unfortunately, Big Bear had taken another deep laceration across his left forearm in the process. "Whoosh!" growled Big Bear, utterly refusing to back down despite the bleeding wounds on both of his forelimbs. If anything, the pain only seemed to fuel his primal battle lust. Rearing back on his massive hind legs, he began raining down a devastating series of alternating paw strikes. Heavy, Bone-crushing impacts sounded in rapid succession as his signature chain palm strike decimated the target. By the time the dust finally settled, the creature beneath him had been reduced to a literal two-dimensional pulp on the forest floor. Still unsatisfied, Big Bear turned his bloodshot eyes toward the remaining 2 wounded monsters, ready to finish them off as well. "Easy there, that's enough," I called out quickly, stepping in to halt his advance. I raised my hand to signal a ceasefire before he could pulverize the survivors. Since these 2 were already severely weakened, the success rate for my conversion talismans would be exceptionally high. While their overall combat capabilities couldn't rival Big Bear's raw power, that high-speed spinning defensive maneuver of theirs was a highly practical skill. "Woo!" muttered Big Bear, shedding his bloodthirsty aura in an instant as he obediently retreated to sit and lick his bleeding paws. I pulled out 2 recruitment talismans and flicked them onto the wounded beasts. A system notification pinged, confirming the successful conversion of the first cauliflower beast into a basic militia unit. A second ping immediately followed, confirming the recruitment of the second creature. Everything had gone perfectly smoothly. With the crisis resolved, I finally took a moment to inspect their status screens. The scan tagged them as Rank C cauliflower beasts, Level 4. 18 strength, 14 endurance, 15 speed. Their talent, fruit and vegetable master, raised farm yields by 15%, and their skill was the spinning leaf blade I had just felt. Loyalty sat at a shaky 63%. The description warned that the harmless look was a lie. They were lethal and endlessly hungry for greens and slimes. I nodded to myself in quiet satisfaction. Though their raw statistics and growth potential were a step below Big Bear's, they were still formidable for early game units. More importantly, that unique agricultural talent made them ideal candidates to manage my future farms and orchards once my territory expanded. The only real concern was their low loyalty rating of 63. If that number dipped below 60, I would run a serious risk of mutiny or desertion. This initial distrust was almost certainly due to the fact that they had just witnessed their companion get flattened into a pancake by my primary enforcer. "Squee!" murmured the rescued water slimes as they gathered around Big Bear's massive legs, seemingly expressing their gratitude while showing concern for his injuries. Shortly after, as if they had remembered some urgent task, they dispersed back into the foliage one by one. I didn't dwell too much on their departure. They weren't bound to my territory yet, so they were entirely free to come and go as they pleased. Big Bear, however, was in no condition to return to hard labor given the severity of his wounds. My 2 newly acquired vegetable minions were also battered, and forcing them to work under such conditions would only tank their already fragile loyalty. Having invested valuable recruitment resources to obtain them, I wasn't about to act foolishly and run my new assets into the ground on day 1. After weighing my limited options, I realized with a sigh that the only able-bodied laborer left in the camp was me. "All right, time to roll up my sleeves," I muttered to myself. I carefully applied healing salves to all 3 of my injured subordinates, rolled up my sleeves, and prepared to fell some timber. Just as I was about to head out, a loud sound interrupted me. "Grumble," rumbled Big Bear's stomach, letting out an embarrassingly loud complaint. Catching my eye, the massive beast sheepishly scratched the back of his head and licked his snout, looking thoroughly embarrassed. The poor guy was starving. I mentally scolded myself for overlooking such a basic survival necessity. Heavy labor and intense combat naturally depleted stamina at an alarming rate. Big Bear had spent his day felling massive pines, constructing buildings, acting as a living windbreak, and surviving a skirmish on top of it all. It would have been a miracle if he wasn't completely famished. "Go ahead, take your pick," I said, laying out a variety of standard rations. He sniffed and poked through the pile with a massive paw for a while, but eventually pulled back with a deeply disappointed look on his face. It was obvious that none of my survival rations appealed to his carnivorous or specific palate. "Don't tell me I've ended up with a picky eater," I chuckled, slightly amused by his refusal. In a thriving settlement, catering to specific tastes was a luxury I could afford, but our current survival situation allowed no room for such indulgence. We simply didn't have the luxury of choice out here in the wild. Just tolerate this for the time being, I coaxed, unwrapping a dense block of compressed emergency rations and holding it out. I broke the dry biscuit into manageable pieces and offered them to him. Woo! Grunted Big Bear, demonstrating his absolute loyalty by reluctantly accepting the dry block. Though the bland, dry starch was clearly not to his liking. He chewed and swallowed it dutifully with a look of sheer, tragic resignation on his face. It took a whopping 10 full bars of my emergency rations before his stamina gauge even began to recover. I stared at him in utter disbelief, completely speechless. His daily caloric requirements were absolutely astronomical. If I failed to establish a sustainable food source soon, my seemingly vast stockpile of personal supplies would vanish in a matter of weeks. According to his species profile, Big Bear's favorite delicacies were fresh fish and wild honey. Tracking down wild beehives was highly dangerous, and securing fish required locating a nearby water source first. Meanwhile, my 2 cauliflower beasts required a steady diet of fresh vegetation or slimes to remain operational. Feeding them my potential slime recruits was out of the question, but securing wild vegetation was a much more realistic goal. Shifting my gaze between the lingering slimes and the newly recruited beasts, a strategic plan began to take shape in my mind. I took aim and tossed a recruitment talisman directly at the largest specimen, a level 7 fire slime. The system interface flashed green once more, confirming the integration of the fire slime into my ranks. Squee! Chirped the newly recruited elemental, bouncing around my boots in absolute, bubbling delight. The remaining wild slimes watched our interaction, their translucent, round faces practically green with envy. I couldn't help but chuckle at their expressive reactions. I gently patted the warm, soft head of my new companion. It was clear that these gentle elemental creatures possessed an incredibly high natural compatibility with my Lord class. As long as I was willing to offer them a place, they would gladly pledge their allegiance to my cause. I decided to name my new fiery scout Big Fire. As for my 2 botanical laborers, I dubbed them Veggie 1 and Veggie 2 for simplicity's sake. Big Fire, take Veggie 1 and Veggie 2 with you and scout the perimeter for wild fruit, I instructed. Squee! Bubbled Big Fire, practically vibrating with excitement as he prepared to lead his first mission. Veggie 1 and Veggie 2, however, merely slumped their heads and shuffled along behind him without much enthusiasm. I watched their departure with a nod of approval. As a slime, Big Fire possessed a highly developed survival instinct that would allow him to steer the group away from dangerous predators. Meanwhile, Veggie 1 and Veggie 2 were naturally attuned to locating the very vegetation they fed upon, making them perfect foragers. Together, they formed a highly efficient, self-sustaining gathering unit. Furthermore, any terrain they traversed would automatically map itself onto my system interface. If they happened to stumble upon a river or lake, I would instantly receive the coordinates. This solved the immediate feeding requirements for my new botanical guards. As for Big Bear's massive appetite, I would just have to figure that out as we went. If worst came to worst, I could always browse the global trade network, though I doubted anyone would be selling precious food resources this early in the game. Food was the ultimate lifeblood of any fledgling territory during these critical first few days. All right, time to get my hands dirty, I muttered, shaking off my doubts. Upgrading my territory to level 3 required me to construct 5 standard residences, 3 conversion stations, a lumber mill, a quarry, and a granary. Unsurprisingly, every single one of those blueprints called for massive amounts of processed timber. I spat on my palms, gripped the handle tightly, and began hacking away at the nearest tree. The golden sun slowly dipped below the western horizon as the pale, hazy curve of a foreign moon climbed into the darkening sky. It appeared this alien world shared a similar diurnal cycle to Earth, possessing its own distinct day, night, sun, and celestial body. Utilizing the colossal physical attributes I had inherited from Big Bear, I managed to fell 7 massive green plains firs, processing them into 90 units of standard lumber through my system interface. Combining this with my existing stockpile, I finally had enough materials to queue up the construction of a conversion station, a lumber mill, a granary, and a new residence all at once. The new conversion station was intended to process and house the local fire slimes. Now that I had integrated Big Fire, it only made sense to prepare the infrastructure to accommodate the rest of his fiery kin. The lumber mill would drastically increase our future woodcutting efficiency, the granary would keep our gathered food from spoiling, and the extra residence ensured I wouldn't face housing shortages as our numbers grew. By the time the final structure materialized, both my stamina pool and mental focus were completely depleted. While physical exhaustion could easily be remedied by consuming rations, my drained mental state required actual, deep sleep to recover. At this early stage of development, sleep was the only viable method of restoring my cognitive energy. Meanwhile, Big Bear's severely lacerated forepaws meant he was completely benched from manual labor for the foreseeable future. Right on cue, the rustling of leaves announced the return of my small foraging party. They certainly had not returned empty-handed. They dragged back 2 woven fiber sacks bursting with plump, exotic wild fruits. With this haul, the nutritional needs of my botanical minions were secured for at least the next few days. Unfortunately, they had found no signs of a running river or a wild beehive during their trek. Securing proper sustenance for my massive guardian remained an incredibly frustrating hurdle. If worst came to worst, I would just have to send Big Bear out to forage for himself the following morning, I reasoned. Given his primal instincts, he would likely possess some innate ability to track down his preferred foods in this ecosystem. The issue was that he remained my absolute strongest asset. Dispatching him on a solo hunting trip meant our territory's construction and defensive security would grind to a halt. Just as I was agonizing over this logistical dilemma, the pack of wild water slimes that had departed earlier that afternoon suddenly emerged from the brush. Bouncing eagerly toward the resting beast, their gelatinous bodies suddenly compressed tightly like loaded springs. Next time, we'll find out if these returning water slimes are bringing a solution to our food crisis, or if Big Bear is about to wake up to a sticky disaster. Do you think Zhou Yun made the right call lying to his parents about the true scale of his 9S rank territory? Or would you have bragged about your 10 billion square kilometer planet immediately? Smash that subscribe button and drop a like to lock in your daily quest rewards so you don't miss the next episode.